You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions. This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Become a patron today at patreon.com/intotheportal.
Hello, and welcome back into the portal. I'm Amber Ray.
And I'm Andrew McKay.
And hello, folks. We are back with a Film Friday for you guys.
Yeah, what's up, everybody?
We hope everyone's doing okay, hanging in there. If you've been in isolation for a while, if you're just entering isolation as we are here in Canada, we're just kind of in this strange, ambiguous zone, eh? And I think everyone's kind of floating around that.
Yeah, I would definitely say so. I mean, things have definitely, it changes so drastically day by day with this whole situation that everyone globally is sort of dealing with here. We hope everyone's healthy. We hope everyone's doing well, all of our listeners out there. We definitely plan on still, obviously, bringing you guys awesome content. Amber and I ourselves are dealing with a little bit of a shift around in our lives here as far as layoffs and trying to figure things out.
EI, man. EI's a thing for us apparently now.
Yeah.
I've never had to go on EI.
Didn't expect it.
Never expected to ever.
It's crazy
you can
times.
avoid it, but it's, you guys all know we're in the wine industry, so not very relevant in these strange times we're in.
No, not particularly. But it's okay. We're going to come out of it ahead, and I'm really excited about some of the reading and things we'll be able to get done in self-isolation. That's definitely paranormal and cryptozoological and everything else related. But we do hope everyone's doing okay. For those of you who are feeling especially stressed out, or if you're dealing with something, we just wanted to remind you guys about the current sponsor we have. That's BetterHelp, and how awesome it is. And we're not going to do like a little actual ad spot break here right at the beginning, but we wanted to mention it again. The link will be in the show notes here. You guys do get 10% off with the promo code PORTAL, and it's just a really awesome online resource. You can choose different ways to interact with accredited and licensed online counselors and therapists. So it's everyone's mental health is really important. So we encourage you guys to check that out. But today we are here to talk about funky, crazy sci-fi things.
Yeah, other things that can definitely help your mental stress. And I feel like probably a lot of people are binging movies and TV shows at this point, because what else do you really have to do?
No kidding.
Or podcasts, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's the three Bs.
These are essential
video
resources.
Games, which we've got into our N64 again.
We've gone retro.
You know, that's how we roll. But anyways, we are talking about a beautiful sci-fi cult classic from 1996, Mars Attacks, directed by Tim Burton, sort of written by him, but he didn't want writing credit for it. He gave it to the actual writers. And this was something that we've kind of been thinking about for a while.
This is a movie, I just want to say this off the top. It's kind of funny because when I first watched this movie, I was probably like 8 or 9 years old or something like that. Like I was born in 91. It came out in 96, and it freaked me out. Like I had nightmares. This movie scared me.
Really? Did you watch Independence Day? Because that came out right around the same time.
I also watched Independence Day, and Independence Day ruined me even worse because it was scarier and a little bit more intense and not as much of a mockery. As Mars Attacks ended up being, although they were both playing off of similar themes of the times as far as the whole War of the Worlds type mentality.
Very much, but in totally different ways. Like, obviously, a lot of these elements of Mars Attacks are very parodic. Oh my God, I'm not pronouncing that right. It's a parody on a lot of stuff, and it does play on a lot of themes from films from the 1950s and onward. And it definitely takes it with a grain of salt. I'll say that.
Oh, for
which
sure.
I love. This was from Rotten Tomatoes, actually. This is just a quote here talking about the film. It says, the storyline affectionately harkens back to the deadpan sincerity of such 1950s and 60s science fiction films as The Day the Earth Stood Still, and War of the Worlds. Flying saucers have been reliably seen over the capitals of the world, and the whole world awaits with bated breath to see what will transpire.
Right.
And that's what we're introduced to at the very beginning, the outset of this movie. And we've seen this multiple times, obviously, but for me, it was a reminder. I was like, how does this even really go down? Because I remember elements, obviously, there's very, very ingrained moments of this movie that you'll never forget, but
definitely
piecing it all together again was kind of fun. What did you think of the very outset of this movie and what we're introduced to?
Well, I mean, it's so funny because I just mentioned how I was freaked out by it as a kid, so I never thought of it that way. And obviously, we took a long gap in between watching it again, even though we have seen it quite a number of times. But like, I think maybe you and I maybe watched it together in the first year we were maybe together. Like, I haven't watched this movie for close to a decade, I would say.
Almost, yeah.
And it's it is kind of an interesting take on period pieces of 50s film.
Period pieces, and it in itself is a period piece. It's very time stamped with the technology they're
90s,
using for the film. And for me, I was just like, whoa. I look at that like early CGI and I just want to throw up a little bit in my mouth.
It's pretty bad.
It's pretty bad, but it's pretty funny at the same time. So you can, just because this isn't a very serious film, you can just take it all in stride kind of thing. But for me, I was like, why didn't he do it in stop motion? I actually have a really funny point in our very late section of this film. Yeah, we're going to talk about some fun facts about this. But
pretty crazy who's in it. Like, who's in this movie?
Oh,
like,
yeah, totally,
insane.
yeah. This is another really fun fact because they're obviously in this casting, you see, there's a staggering amount of very well-known actors, people that were emerging in the 1990s, people that were very established during that time and beyond, right? And we still see in films today. Right off the bat, we got Jack Nicholson playing two roles. You know, he's the Las Vegas developer, Art Land, and he's also the president, James Dale.
Yes.
We got Glenn Close as the first lady, Pierce Brosnan as the scientist / like Professor Kessler, whatever.
Right, yeah, Donald
Danny
Kessler.
DeVito. It just goes on and on. Martin Short, Sarah Jessica Parker, come on, Michael J. Fox, Jack Black, Tom Jones, Natalie Portman, all sorts of crazy people that are just super talented. It was funny when we were watching the show. I was like, so many awesome people. And I was like, wait a second, Amber. So many awesome actors. I don't know if they're all great people.
Never met them personally, but
I would hope, but you never know.
A couple others that were potentially in the film as well, which is kind of
that's true. Yeah, this was fun because we looked into a little bit of trivia for you guys, and a lot of big names that were supposed to appear or kind of were hopefully going to appear but didn't, including Johnny Depp, Susan Sarandon, Michael Keaton, Meryl Streep, and Diane Keaton. The two last ones I named there were supposed to maybe have been cast as the first lady, but then Glenn Close got the role.
And she did a good job.
She did great.
Meryl Streep would have been awesome in there too.
She would have been amazing. Yeah, but for me, it was like, ooh, like it's almost like too satirical. I would almost want like a Martha Stewart instead or something, you know? Because she's been doing great on those Subway ads, let me tell you.
No kidding. She would have been too young back then, I suppose, maybe for that role.
Maybe.
But yeah, those Subway ads are hilarious. But let's get right into this because it kind of kicks off in sort of what I would call familiar territory in a way, right? It pops up on the screen. It's this very sort of just deserted rural setting, right? 4 miles outside of Lockjaw, Kentucky.
Lockjaw.
And it doesn't give a date because I feel like and that is for a specific reason, right? It's because it's not meant to be taken seriously right from Jump Street. It's a mashup of a bunch of 50s, 60s sci-fi. Harkening back to all that. So that's why it just says May 9th at 6:57 p.m. outside, 4 miles outside Lockjaw.
It's very like modernist though. Like everything, as far as even like the furniture, the mise en scène, everything is very much like post-war 1950s, 60s kind of thing and vibing.
Totally.
Didn't this remind you too when we see that very first scene of like the dusty, almost, I don't know if we saw any actual tumbleweeds rolling in the breeze or anything, but
maybe.
It just reminded me of every single beginning of a rural episode of Murder, She Wrote.
Yep, 100%. Every single country episode that has ever happened on Murder, She Wrote, that's how it starts, definitely. And this is definitely territory that we're familiar with, and it's always rural America, it sort of seems like, right? And I don't know if this popped into your head when we were watching, but now that we've done the show and talked about some other UFO events and paranormal things and stuff like that, obviously Kelly Hopkinsville, Kentucky came to mind as far as like strange things kicking off in Kentucky, right? Also, the Flatwoods Counters that were in neighboring West Virginia, so another sort of close by neighboring state. And rural America always seems to sort of have a special place as being the epicenter of activity, of strangeness, right? It's never really like the middle-sized towns. It's either like middle of nowhere rural America, or it is like Independence Day, New York is getting attacked, giant buildings. There's not really any in between.
Totally.
It's really black and white in that regard.
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of interesting. And they start off with this opening scene that's really, really bizarre, which is the cows on fire, which is really disturbing. And I don't remember that ever really disturbing me as a kid watching this for the first time. It was more the Martians themselves. But now watching it as an adult, enjoying it as a fun, quirky movie, that's still really like disturbing,
dark.
Kind of, right? It's
and the
dark.
joke that goes along like, you got barbecue cooking all day. I've been hearing it. Or hearing it, smelling it.
Very strange.
Very dark, yeah.
And it's obviously a little bit of a foreshadowing of the torture and the mockery of humanity that's to come, really.
Exactly. It does make reference to quite heavily to the cattle mutilations, a connection with ufology and UFO sightings and things of that nature too. And also, I just wanted to play on your point there about the idea that it's either very rural or very suburban, very centrally located. It starts rural, and then that's where it's almost like these like the borderlines, right? It's like, what is real and what isn't. And when you're not there,
right,
and when you see a headline like that, you could just definitely think that it's fake, right?
Absolutely. And those are the headlines we all see walking through the grocery store checkout, the National Enquirer, and these crazy newspapers. And I remember that being kind of a joke and a theme in a lot of X-Files episodes where those things are riddled with nothing but nonsense. But there's maybe the one story in there that happens to be true or based on truth, right?
And that's what Mulder would look at.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it always gets relegated to the realm of the absolute nonsense and craziness. But it's actually potentially, and that reminded me of that, like cows on fire running through Lockjaw, Kentucky. Nobody would believe that except for the farmer and the guy he was standing next to on the road that watched it, right?
And then it's not when you get the mayhem, destruction, the mass destruction that happens in places like in this movie in Las Vegas, for example, and the White House and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And abroad, right, in France and whatever. And that's when you get this like solidification of the threat.
Right. And the threat is, of course, the Martians. And they're very, they're sort of interesting. Why don't we get into a brief little description?
And that in itself is definitely one of those things you would see in a skeptical Inquirer or any sort of like, not Pulp Fiction magazines, but like the tabloid type magazines, I guess is the word
the sci-fi tabloids, sure.
The tabs. Anyways, these Martians are weird. And again, the animation really adds to it. It's typical 90s like animation where it's none of this looks natural, none of this looks right, but let's ignore all that.
Right.
And I like the way that they had this accented cranium where we get the exposed brains and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And they're very similar to us, right? Physiologically, they got 2 eyes, they've got 2 hands, 2 legs.
Bipedal,
They are bipedal. They have a torso, they have a brain, they seemingly have some semblance of a...
Carbon-based.
Well, carbon-based to a certain extent, but they do need nitrogen to survive.
Yeah, they can't breathe exactly clearly the same, the composition of Earth's atmosphere. And
which is why we had the shells, right, around the soldiers.
Right.
We also had the example of the one that tried to infiltrate, right, the Marilyn Monroe alien that comes in and she's chewing on gum the whole time. And you're like, this is weird. What's going on? And then they realize
strange.
that it's pure nitrogen.
Yeah. It's funny. Like I added just the note in here. Obviously, they have the domes over them to go around and wreak mayhem and havoc on humanity when they come down. What do they do at home? I mean, the brain is such a vital organ. It's like, but it's presented as almost an external organ on these entities, right? Yeah. It's not an internal organ that needs to be protected by the skull.
It's moist.
Yeah.
Like it looks moist, in my opinion. It's like, what's going on there? And when they actually do the dissection, when they manage to capture and kill one and go to town with it, and they're like, what is really going on here? It's just a bunch of green goo and all this craziness.
Right.
But anyways, I want to get into a big question here because this film does a great job of parodizing or not making a mockery per se, but going the opposite way as opposed to a lot of traditional sci-fi UFO movies or alien invasion movies, where it's always grappling with this idea of like, are they peaceful? Are they hostile? What do they want from us? And why do they come here?
Right.
Which would be obvious questions, right? Even if it's kind of funny to reverse the question and be like, well, if we were exploring space and we got in a shuttle and we ended up going to Mars or somewhere else and landing there and being like, and then the people themselves are asking us those questions, like, what are you doing here? What do you want? For us, I guess it would be resources. It would be exploration based. Initially, it would be peaceful, but who knows where relations would go from there.
Yeah, exactly.
And so this is where it's like, it's pretty murky. And Jack Nicholson's character, President Dale,
Yeah,
or no, is it
was
Art Dale? Art Dale is the, Art Land and
Art
James
Land,
Dale.
right.
I'm going to get those mixed up the whole time. James Dale. President James
All
Dale.
right. That's a very distinguished name.
James Dale.
Sure.
James Dale.
James Dale.
But his character takes a very sympathetic, perhaps liberal approach to dealing with these types of
Invaders, quote unquote.
invaders, as you can say. And yeah, like I said, they go the opposite of most invasion films, where it's like they're overly cautionary and they want to outright attack or have some sort of military presence. In this case, it's more of like a diplomatic, like scientific leaning, right? And he does rely, on Dr. Donald Kessler, which is Pierce's character,
Right.
for a lot of his decisions outright, which in the end don't really seem to be good decisions.
Which is kind of ironic. It's like double irony, because I
is.
feel like it's making a joke of having the contrast between Donald Kessler's character, which is this British scientist, which is hilarious because he's British for one,
Yeah.
and to the general. Who's this hardcore, like, we need the nuke codes right now, even though he has no idea what's going on yet.
He's like that drill sergeant type
Classic.
guy from like
Totally. He's like straight out of Jarhead or something like that, right? What's the Full Metal Jacket?
Full
is
Metal
the
Jacket,
movie
yeah,
I'm thinking
totally.
of. And that's the contrast we have, because typically you'd think that if this actually happened in reality, then they would, as the United States and many countries in the world go, they opt for military action
Yes.
before any other things.
So this is where it gets weird, right? Because Nicholson's presidential role as Dale, like, he doesn't want to go to the absolute extreme.
No, he's he's
a moderate.
He's a moderate.
There you go.
He's
And he perseveres with this, and he is very sympathetic to Kessler's observations and like suggestions and all this stuff, as opposed to favoring a hardline approach,
Right.
Which probably could have saved them, but actually not, because they would have gone to war, and in the end, we realized that nukes aren't effective.
we do figure that out.
Yeah, exactly. Not right away, though.
Yeah.
But the thing is that it's interesting about this whole Kessler character, too, is the idea that he believes that because they are more advanced than us, they must be peaceful. An advanced civilization must be peaceful,
Right.
which is hilarious and a huge joke, because we as humans generally define ourselves as the most advanced species on our planet, yet we are constantly riddled with war.
Or the opposite of peaceful, sure.
Yeah, self-interest and all these other conflicts relating from that. And we use all sorts of things that are damaging, like fossil fuels.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have noticed the headlines that CO2 emissions have decreased rapidly.
Which is great.
And there seems to be very beneficial results as opposed, but anyways, we're not going to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah. No, that is really funny because, it's
kind of human exceptionalist, right?
Absolutely.
It sets that bar. Humans set the bar for all forms of civilization, which in a lot of ways you see the way that mentality is ineffective, and that they can't relate to these Martians in the ways that I think they can.
Yeah,
actually.
it's human exceptionalist twofold, and one, like, in this idea that the whole idea of advancement equaling peacefulness, and then also the idea that in order for that to make sense, they would have to be able to land and understand us. You know what I mean?
Or have been understanding us from afar.
Right, and understand us as we are. Right. And we can only make those judgments based on how we perceive ourselves. Right. I don't want to get too technical here, but it's the opposite of a movie like, for example, Arrival, if you guys have seen that,
Right, yeah.
where essentially extraterrestrials show up, their perception and understanding of reality is the opposite of ours. So
they weren't even linear. They didn't even have like
So,
the language that we ascribe as language.
right.
You know,
so we wouldn't even be they wouldn't even really be able to make a judgment on whether or not like we're worthy or whatever. You know what I mean? To like be able to make negotiations or anything like that.
Totally.
Which is kind of
or
funny.
what is that? Like even the idea that there are negotiations to be had, that there is self-interest, that they actually want something from us.
Exactly. That's
You know what I
I
mean?
guess that's what I'm getting
All
at
of
here.
those
Yeah,
premises
exactly.
are humanist to a
Yes.
certain degree.
They need our water.
That's,
They need
that's the way that we understand.
Right. Our nuclear technology. Like this reminds me of Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, where it's like every time there's an extraterrestrial episode, it's they're looking for the nuclear reactor on the
Yeah,
sub. It's like, come on.
they want the energy, yeah.
This is all you could come up with in the 1960s. I love that show. But
Great show. But I like it too because Kessler makes several interesting statements throughout the whole thing. But one of the earliest ones was like when he is questioned on like, well, we've been to Mars supposedly, or we've seen it from a telescope and the Hubble scope and all this kind of stuff, and we've never seen any evidence of this. And he says, we've never dove under the surface. And there are these canals that are basically canyons that run miles deep. And the fact that this was all coming out from under the surface, right? This is all boiling under the surface. That, to me, is a very apt metaphor for a lot of things that happen in our world and possibly beyond.
no doubt. And it's also playing off of very real ideas and themes that existed that were sort of fueling those movies in the honestly, it started in the 1930s with these sci-fi movies that really developed in the 50s in terms of technology.
A silent one. I can't remember the date on that one, but yeah, no,
I mean,
there is a lot.
We've watched some UFO and
Even
alien.
just general advancement, like not even UFO related, but even, what's it called? The Time Machine, that early one, H.G. Wells. I'm not sure when that was actually made into a movie form, but that was quite an early novel from the turn of the century.
And definitely
20th
just
century.
paranormal stuff similar to that. But yeah, this was an idea that was built off of this idea of an ancient civilization, potentially at one point in time, living on Mars because, we still don't know a lot about that planet, about the red planet, right? But and most recently, obviously, researchers have found more and more different sort of microbial life on Mars in the subsurface, and could have housed this life and different forms of life for hundreds of millions of years, even longer than that, right? The life that exists there now was like borrowing hydrogen atoms essentially from water and just living off of very, very, very small amounts of energy. Similar in a lot of ways to things we've mentioned before. I think it was on our Patreon episode with the Hollow Earth, where there was life discovered at depths in some abandoned mines that they ended up penetrating even deeper into where nobody expected it to be. And it was multi-celled, like essentially like nematode, like pretty advanced life for being at depths that nothing was supposed to be.
If I'm not mistaken, some of those were in anaerobic conditions, correct? Where there's no oxygen.
Yeah.
There are other
They're
gases.
borrowing from other things.
Was it nitrogen? I can't remember if these were nitrogen-based
I can't remember exactly. But it's just interesting, this idea that obviously, it's curious to think about how ancient life could have existed well before even we developed. You know what I mean? Like this idea of life on another planet close to us.
Totally. I'm almost thinking in reverse here, where it's like, what if this evidence that we see today is evidence of life that existed way, 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 and then over billions of years it became inhabitable and then kind of receded into, again, single-celled or perhaps very simplistic multi-cell organisms that are like very microbial in nature.
Totally.
I don't know.
This was all sort of spawned, I guess you might say, by this guy, Percival Lowell, 1895, just before the turn of the century. He published a few different books that were really popular. One was just called Mars and talked about the red planet. And this was followed up a few years later in 1906 by Mars and its Canals, because he observed what multiple other astronomers around the world, including a couple of famous Italian ones, I don't have their names right in front of me here, essentially what looked to be former canals on the surface of Mars, and whether or not this was from fresh water or salt water or whatever wasn't really known.
Like canals, like when I hear the word canal as opposed to like a I don't even know. what
Sounds
I'm thinking of.
man-made.
Yeah, as opposed to a glen or like a
river
valley
system
or like,
or
you know
whatever,
what I mean?
right? Yeah, it definitely implies that there's some sort of ancient civilization involved. And that's definitely what he believed. And it's sort of been disproven in a sense, but there's hardcore conspiracy theorists out there that still buy into this. But there's so much we don't know about the Red Planet. We haven't really explored it. Maybe there is some structures in the subsurface that we don't know of. We're kind of getting really serious right now, even though we're talking about Mars Attacks, which is a categorically not serious film, because we could talk about all day about Martians and the idea of ancient civilizations existing at one point. But let's talk about maybe the arrival of the actual cheesy CGI Martians in Mars Attacks here, because they show up in a place that we're pretty familiar with.
Exactly. It all happened in the Nevada desert, of course. And this is definitely on the nose, but done on purpose to a certain degree. What better place than to first grease Martians than in the desert, an area so close to the infamous Area 51?
Of course.
Very, very much known for these forays into alien technologies or perhaps government conspiracies or classified projects going on.
Is it almost implying human ignorance in and of itself? It's just like, hey guys, let's put up the grandstand and the big welcome spot over here. Maybe they won't remember 1947
I wonder,
or something like that, right?
Actually, that's a good question, yeah. And it's just weird. It's grandstanding, right? It's awkward. It's Roswellian, but it's not, right? Because it's a few states over and that type of thing. But and this whole idea, it's like, welcome to Earth. There's like a big grandstand. There's like people, they're like filing cars into the middle of nowhere. And this is all the work of President James Dale, right? Because he doesn't want it to be a strictly military approach. He wants to be friendly. He wants it to be open. But he does say it needs to be supervised. And so that's where you get the insertion of the military and Jack Black's character, which is very fitting. I loved his role. I didn't even realize until we looked into some of the trivia about this film that Jack Black is not his real name.
Wow. I mean, I know.
It's not.
Blew my mind.
It's very much not. And it kind of makes me sad to a certain degree that it's Thomas.
Yeah.
It's about Thomas Black. Jack Black works way better in the entertainment
I'm sure
scene.
a lot of celebrities, we'd be surprised.
Yeah, we would.
Yeah.
But anyways, going back to this whole thing where it's like, it's just so hokey. It's very well-wishing. Obviously, they don't want it to be a negative interaction by any means. And everything seems to go very well. We get this diplomatic guys from the Martians announcing, saying, greetings, I am the Martian ambassador, with his beautiful glittery cloak and all this kind of stuff. And the tongue unrolling out from their UFO saucer. And it's very impressive, right?
Yeah.
But also is the reception, right? Because we got a big crowd. We've got a show of tanks. We've got a show of military helicopters and all this stuff.
It's a strange sort of assortment because it's that, and it's also like the Americana, like fair bandstands watching to see the prize hog.
It's like they're watching a race in the desert as opposed to like the first interaction between Earthlings and a non-Earthling race.
Sure.
And because this is an American-made film and it's very Hollywood-esque, they're clearly making this statement about the United States and this like military complex that's intimately involved in the culture of the U.S. And it's very poignant to think that it's the U.S. that they decide to land in. They've been circling our planet for days and days, and then they happen to land.
First contact
In Nevada. It's not France. It's not Germany. It's the U.S.
And all the casinos are at a standstill watching it on TV, right?
And it's just so weird, right? Because it's like humans are so ignorant that Martians have the upper hand to a certain degree because they are just mischief makers to... We don't really know what they want by the end of this movie. All they want is to cause mayhem and destruction and kill as many people as they can, have as many weird experiments as possible, and just breaking hell loose, essentially.
Yeah. They do not come in peace, as they state very loudly. And then there's the hilarious dove scene. They came in peace, and the guy lets go of the dove.
He's got the Jesus hair and everything, and he's all like hippy-dippy trippy. And then it's so funny, too, because the daughter, Natalie Portman, that's the daughter of the president, makes it, well, what if it was the dove? Maybe they don't like doves. Yeah. It's like, then again, that's more cause for contemplation, indecisiveness on the part of the president and the executive firm and all this kind of stuff.
Very true.
And it just kind of rolls out from there.
Classic ray guns at the beginning when all the
Yes.
mayhem
We
breaks
had
loose,
to
which
have
is pretty
that.
fun. Classic sound effects for that.
I thought it was weird that they had the two colors, to be honest.
The melted victims, green and red skeletons.
I didn't see any actual
Merry Christmas.
inferences to that or explanations for that. Yeah, Merry Christmas, indeed.
Yeah, no, I didn't either. That was kind of interesting. We didn't really, I mean, other than the fact that they're green, I guess would be the green.
Maybe. They like
correlation.
Christmas, okay?
Yeah, apparently they do. Yeah, I mean, they're green on the insides, and there's no genitalia, no gender after this attack
Supposedly.
when they do this autopsy, which is kind of strange. But meanwhile, there's experiments of their own going on, of course, because poor Sarah Jessica Parker, who is this journalist and TV show host, ends up, getting knocked unconscious. Her boyfriend, who is a fellow TV man,
Michael J. Fox.
doesn't quite make it and ends
He
up on
was
the ship.
supposed to be played by Johnny Depp, by the way.
Which was such a weird little bit of trivia.
So strange.
That would have been interesting to see Johnny Depp in that role. He kind of missed out because this is such a cult
He
classic
really
of
did.
like epic movies with a lot of people. Anyway, this was funny to me because this whole idea of obviously Sarah Jessica Parker's character and also Pierce Brosnan's character, Dr. Donald Kessler, getting taken into sort of the mothership, I guess, so to speak. And they start doing these weird experiments. They're swapping heads around. They've got the little chihuahua on there as well. And they end up replacing heads with Sarah Jessica Parker's character and the chihuahua. And I just thought that this was kind of a funny classic trope, this whole idea of how we have absolutely no understanding of anything having to do with like UFOlogy and the things that are really strange, like abductees and people that come back down with weird implants in them, and it doesn't make any sense. Why would you give a shit?
The cattle mutilations.
Exactly, cattle mutilations,
And we did see a cow being carried away on the back of one of the Martians in the background.
Yeah,
When we see them
yeah.
on the ship after the initial attack when they've kidnapped Sarah Jessica Parker.
Yeah. So it's just sort of funny, right? Like it's just sort of, it just speaks to that, how it's just all part of this sort of absolutely bizarre phenomena that we've been trying to understand for a very long time, maybe since 47 and Roswell, but probably well before that too, really. And we've dug into a few things that were before Roswell before on the show, but we don't know jack shit.
No, we don't. And maybe they don't either. Because they're just like playing around with us. We're just there like, we're almost like the amoebas on their trays and like the little like petri dishes like scientists experiment with. That's all we are to them. And they don't really have a rhyme or reason. Like they dismantle Pierce Brosnan entirely, or Dr. Kessler, I should say.
Yeah.
And just leave him hanging with his like, and the thing for me, I'm like laughing because you see the blood dripping out of his head. How is he able to be alive right now? It's like, are these special probes like giving him life or
And I guess that's
whatever?
sort of like
I don't know.
humanist in and of itself too, to expect that there would be a reason to take us, that we're so important. You need to actually get something out of this. Hey, buddy, if you're going to abduct me and cut my head
be
off
all
and
for
do
fun.
weird stuff, you better figure something out. It
You're just sadist, man.
Totally. It reminds me of a Far Side comic. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was basically just like humans in a jar, and there was like a giant alien that had them, and it was just kind of like how we would, collect bugs when we were a kid.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like that.
Oh, totally. I remember one time I had I had one of those little, the ones that you're supposed to keep butterflies in, those little cages.
Yeah.
And me and my friend at the time decided that we were going to catch as many wasps as we could and as many queen wasps as we could and put them all in the one thing together and just collect them all. And then I remember
Jesus.
forgetting about it as kids do and then coming back days later and being like, oh, you guys all died.
A massacre.
It was a massacre and I feel
Horrible.
really bad about it.
Yeah. How do you sleep at night?
Oh no.
Well, they try to use nukes basically because obviously the Earth ends up at war, as to be expected. That's the first big question. It's almost Doctor Strangelovian. You know what I mean? They're in the war room. They got the big board. They got the world map up there and trying to figure it out.
But what about the big board?
What about the big board?
We're gonna see it.
And they still don't know why they're here. They've still been grappling this whole time whether or not to use nukes or not. And the president is still like fighting against the general to pull the trigger and to use them.
He almost has like a tantrum. He's like, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up.
It's so good.
And he just goes and sits down, takes his little clipboard. It's like, all right, we're all doomed. And it's kind of sad because that general comes to his last defense in the moment of need when he's like, but he only has 2 little pistols, which is really pathetic in my mind. It's like, where are your machine guns?
And he gets
Hello?
shrunk down and stepped on like a bug.
Yep.
which is all we really are.
A great metaphor too, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So we're struggling with this question. It's like we added it right into the doc here that we're doing the show off of. It's like, why did the Martians come? Why are they here? And it's clearly not just to mess with Tom Jones. He was just a hilarious throw into this movie to make it even more fun. And ended up being the credits song, which was so awesome too.
It's unusual.
But we've already mentioned this idea that like them wanting something is very humanist in a way, like water, nuclear technology, mineral resources. You know, if these are interdimensional beings or from a far off galaxy or whatever it may be, obviously in this instance, it's actually Mars, they would pretty much be able to just take what they want, right?
What do they need? Like, we don't even really come to any conclusion by the end of this movie. All they want is to cause mischief and chaos and destruction.
And it's pretty hilarious, too. There's some funny moments. I mean, there's essentially, you know, it's obviously, you could even say it starts with the stampede at the beginning, even though it's kind of a disturbing image. But then there's the Martians knocking over the Easter Island Moai, the heads, like bowling pins. They're just down there bowling with their flying saucers. They end up, you know.
The Eiffel Tower. That's another one.
They mess with a group of Boy Scouts around the Washington Monument are, you know, just out for a hike, and they end up redirecting a lot of the nuclear attacks into other sort of just creating mayhem. And at this point in time, we don't really know what's going on in the rest of the world. Like, Paris is attacked. We see the Eiffel Tower being destroyed. And you found out that there was way more money that was supposed to get put into this movie.
Yeah, they initially, like Burton, wanted about a budget of approximately $260 million, and he ended up getting a budget of $60 million. So in the end, there was about 37 characters that were cut out of the show. There was also a large quantity of scenes involving large-scale Martian invasions and other cities across the world, and just different scenarios overall, and those were all cut. And in my mind, I kind of look at them like, well, that definitely would have made this more of a big-budget production, but at the same time, I don't think they necessarily needed that for this narrative.
Agreed. And then, of course, in the end, it's country music that defeats the Martians, which is sort of fitting, I suppose, because the humans just sort of fall ass backwards into the thing that saves them, which is nothing what they've been using this entire time. Not guns, not nukes, not chemical weapons, not anything. It's a 1952 song by Slim Whitman. I don't know if anyone out there has ever actually heard of Slim Whitman other than Mars Attacks, but he was an American country music, Western folk singer. He actually ended up selling 70 million records, but he actually claimed he sold double that, like 140 million. So kind of a curious fellow. But yeah, super successful. It wasn't just the one-off, because every time I've listened to this movie or watched this movie and listened to that song, I've always thought, is this even a real song? Like, is this an actual country song, or is it just... Anyway, but it seems like the country twang is just far too much for the Martian cranium, essentially. So they can't handle it. I guess it's the vibrations of that acoustics. Is that what you think it is? Or is this really just like the song is so horrible that they can't handle it? It just
offends them to the extent where they can't actually exist.
Tom Jones turns it off when he gets in the plane to try to escape.
It could have something to do with their increased cranial abnormalities, as we would call them, but
I guess
it also could be a thing where it's almost similar to the theorized Dyatlov Pass deaths, where it's what's it called again? That sub something sound. Infrasound, yeah, exactly. Could be something like that, but I think it's actually pretty ironic, right? And that's exactly what Tim Burton's trying to draw off of.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too.
Well, do we want to get into some fun facts here?
Sure, let's do it.
Yeah. Because there was a couple here, and when I watched this, like I already said before at the very top of this episode, the CGI is very painful. It's very raw. It's very primitive. It's not very good. And when I think of Tim Burton, I don't think of CGI. I think of stop motion.
Definitely.
And he actually did want to use stop motion for this initially. And he wanted to make it look deliberately as cheap as possible. And there was a team that actually spent about 8 months trying to work on this before Burton was persuaded to move to a more modern technique, which is the digitally or computer generated images, essentially. There is also another interesting part here, the scene that we see, because we see a lot of destruction in the film, particularly revolving around Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. And the Galaxy Hotel, which is destroyed by the Martians during this film, is actually footage of the real life implosion of this film, of this building.
Right.
which was destroyed in 1995.
Which is awesome.
Pretty cool. A lot of history in this building too. Frank Sinatra was seen around the hotel during its prime, along with Elvis Presley. Pretty cool,
Crazy.
man. I know. I thought that was kind of interesting. Another fun fact: this was actually based off of not a video game, not like a board game. It was actually a card game.
That I did not know. I always thought it was a video game.
There's one very like the film uses one card that has this like, it's basically one of the aliens. It's very similar, right? Like the way that they look physiologically.
Sure.
Pulling off a mask. It's very akin to the Marilyn Monroe alien that we see. That's
Ends up biting off, what's his name's finger? The press secretary's finger.
exactly.
Martin Short. The reason I thought it was a video game, I always thought the scene with the kids skipping school playing the arcade game when their mom stops and chucks them into the bus. I always thought that was like a reference to maybe like the arcade version of the game.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know why. Even though it didn't say it on the side or anything. It's not like it said Mars Attacks on the side of the game or anything like that. But it just reminded me of it.
We should look and see if we can find like a vintage card set of Mars Attacks.
Oh, I wonder if they're like expensive, like super collectible because of this movie.
I wonder.
And didn't you say that there was maybe going to be a sequel potentially?
I did see something online that was dated to like February of this year that was saying that it could be
Maybe not.
Mars Attacks cards, Mars Attacks the dice game.
What?
No way.
We should play.
15 cards for $9.99. No way.
That's not that bad.
We're getting this.
Better than it's cheaper than Magic cards and Pokemon cards. That's
Mars
for sure.
Attacks Space Adventure cards, a bundle of 24 packs. Woo! $144 on Amazon. Whee!
Damn.
Aged 3 and up.
If anyone out there listening
We can
owns
handle
any
this.
of these, we'd be very interested to.
3 to 6 players. Aww.
That's really cool.
Playtime 60 minutes.
We definitely want to hear. I mean, we're kind of getting down to the end of this, and it was a really fun movie because it's obviously in the realm of, like the Killer Clowns from Outer Space, some of those types of films we've covered before on the show. But then it also dabbles in some more serious themes, I guess you might say.
Like more serious satirical themes.
Exactly, they're satirical because they're obviously they're very much playing off of serious things, and you can pluck those out and talk about them as you want with this movie, which is kind of makes it fun. We want to hear what you guys have to say, though. So,
what do you think about all these weird things?
Yes.
What about like Grandma and Richie? Like we didn't cover a lot of stuff on this because we didn't really want to be very I don't even know how to say it. Like,
well, we're at 41 minutes and we're talking about Mars Attacks, and
or we're going like piecemeal, right? Piecing it out scene by scene. The minutia of that can be tiring to some.
Yeah.
And we just want to keep it fresh. So, like, what about things like different symbols in this movie? What do you guys make of the dove, for example? What do you think of the aliens themselves? Like, we want to know any and all weird intricacies or observations you've made about this movie because it's been around for a while.
And like, what would you have done differently? And if there was going to be a sequel, how would you want that to be done? Because I honestly have no idea how they would go about that. Would they make essentially like a carbon copy version, but even make it cheesier? Or would they make it a little more serious? Or how would you go about that? It's weird, right?
I think go cheesy all the way, for sure.
Yeah.
But that's just my opinion. So let's hear what you guys have to say.
Hit us up into the portal mailbox at gmail.com, or obviously check us out on our social media like Facebook, and join our Facebook forum if you're not in there already. It's just like the ITP room where we talk about some weird stuff. Straightupstrange.com is our network, so make sure to check that out, especially during this whole weird COVID-19 thing. You're looking for extra content. We've got a bunch of really cool shows on there for you guys to check out, and more just really honestly interesting projects coming down that we really want you guys to be a part of too. So check those things out, hit us up, and until next time on Into the Portal.
Your gateway to the bizarre.
This podcast is a part of Straight Up Strange Productions. Discover more shows like this one at straightupstrange.com.